Amanda, how are you?
I am really well, thank you, Alex. Yeah, really well. How are you?
I'm very well. I'm very excited.
I'm excited too.
You can teach founders with ADHD how to scale, start, grow a business, and I think I sort of count myself in that category. So I've been genuinely excited about this conversation to learn what you have to share.
Thank you.
Going just before we get to that bit, starting from the very beginning, and it's a question I like to ask everyone. If we could speak to somebody who knew Amanda when she was a child, how would they describe you?
How would they describe me? That's a funny question because I was talking to my mum last night and I was saying I was coming on this podcast and I've been thinking about the kind of early ADHD memories. And I asked her about it and I said, does anything stand out? And she said, well, now that I know just everything, she said, I mean, from the moment you were born, you were, like restless, hyperactive, always needed food, always needed a drink, like always needed something to calm me down, whether that was, and she always says this, I couldn't, as soon as your dad laid a hand on me, you'd be crying and restless. And, I always needed like attention or holding or comforting right through school. Right. I mean, I have memories of one of my earliest memories of that, like, it's really hard to describe to anyone that isn't neurodivergent, but that
Mm.
that impulsive feeling that is wrong on the inside. My mum and dad had a shop when I was probably 3 or 4. It's one of my very earliest memories. I've told this to so many therapists. I can't even tell you. Was like stealing penny sweets, stealing these white mice
Mm.
and those foam shrimps.
Mm.
Not like often, but I would just take one and I'd know inside it was so wrong, but it was like I couldn't help myself. And I never really understood what that feeling was until I was diagnosed, and then you understand what impulsivity is. It's not just being naughty, it's literally like not being able to stop yourself.
Mm. How? I mean, I know exactly what you mean, that impulsivity, and you. Do you think you get like excitement or a rush from perhaps doing something you know is a bit naughty, but the impulsivity kind of takes over?
Yeah, I guess. I don't really like, I mean, I don't know the science behind it, but for me, did I want that sweet? Yeah, I guess I wanted the sweet, didn't I? And I knew that mum and dad were like somewhere around.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I mean, and that went on into, my teenage years. It turned into drinking or, recreational drugs, and then it turned into food or, relationship, like impulsive, borderline sort of obsessive behavior. It's all the same thing, isn't it? But it's funny looking back to being so young, like 3 or 4, and really, really recognizing that feeling in me that I'd never quite understood until I was diagnosed, which is weird, isn't it?
So weird, yeah, and it's so interesting. I mean, I'm not a therapist, but my thinking when you were saying that is, I guess, when you're young, the only thing that you know is sweets, and then
Yes.
and you,
Yeah.
and you
And
get
so, and I heard someone say that recently, actually, saying about with ADHD and like addictive behavior or impulsive behavior, when you're young, the reason so many people go on to develop impulsive food habits is because when you're young, yeah, exactly as you say, food's the only thing available to you. You can't choose drugs or alcohol when you're 3 or 4 years old. I mean, unfortunately, you can't. So yeah, it's food, isn't it? So which is why so many people go on to develop eating disorders, overeating, undereating, whatever that might be.
mm, so relatable, especially when you said about the alcohol, and that's something
Yeah,
I've had issues with, and a lot of my guests have.
yeah,
We can touch on that a bit later because it is an interesting topic.
yeah, definitely.
Going back again to your school reports, do you remember what they look like?
Do I remember my school reports? So I feel like I thought I remembered my school reports, and I'd always had this thing in my head about them being, she's so capable. If only she'd focus. If
Mm,
only she wouldn't talk so much. If only blah blah blah. And I don't know, there's something about growing up where you think, oh, maybe they weren't that bad. And then my mum and dad moved house from our 25-year family home. I had this huge clear out, moved from Cornwall up to Yorkshire. So we were all helping with this elements of this clear out, and I found my reports, and it was actually after I'd been diagnosed. And I'm not embarrassed to say I was just in floods of tears. I was devastated. They were worse than I remembered, as in like more. Every line might as well have said, she's got ADHD, you need to get her seen to, get some help. And made worse because I went to the doctors when I was 11, when I just started school, because I was so upset watching the news. It was when, I don't know if these years are going to match up, so maybe I wasn't 11, maybe 12 or something, at one of these points, but there's a Brugger ferry disaster had just happened. Do you remember that?
vaguely.
Where that bit huge ferry had, like, I'll never forget it, the doors where the cars go in had opened through
Mm,
the sea, or had like broken, and all the water got in, and this ferry sank with all these people on it. All these people died. It was horrific.
mm.
And it was all over the news, and I was obsessed with it. And I was, whatever I was, 10, 11, 12, and I couldn't sleep. I was so sad all the time. I was crying. My mum took me to the doctors, and he said I was depressed. He told me at 11 years old it was depression.
Mm.
And, looking back, it was so clearly this sensitivity, empathy, that part of ADHD. And yeah, I guess just reading my school reports just reminded me of how it's that grieving process you go through, isn't it, when you're diagnosed, of what could have been so different if we just knew more about it then.
Absolutely, and you see women getting misdiagnosed with anxiety, similar to I think what you sounds like yourself with depression,
Yeah,
PMS,
yeah,
because the traits of ADHD can make people feel miserable, and then they go to
yeah.
the GP with other issues like depression or anxiety, and it just doesn't get picked up. It is awful.
No, it is awful. It is, and that's why I'm so passionate about talking about it now, because I just think if you really zoom out, what an incredible time we're living through, that we're breaking this. Like no other generation's going to have to go through what we've been through, of not knowing, being misdiagnosed. The more we talk about it, the more research there is based on women, the more people are going to get diagnosed and won't have to go through that journey of misdiagnosis, or not understanding themselves, or the bad school reports, or whatever it might be.
Mm.
So yeah, I think it's just so important we talk about it, isn't it?
Oh, definitely, absolutely, and there's so many people talking about it, which is good, and on social media, and that's a topic that I'd be keen to get onto later, because we spoke about this before. There's so much
Yeah,
messaging on social media.
yeah,
Some of it's good, some of it's not so good.
yeah.
But just going back again, if you could go back and say something to yourself when you were watching that very disaster, just generally you as a child, what do you think? And with the knowledge that you have now, what do you think you would say to yourself?
It's not a case of like, oh, don't worry about it, everything's going to be fine. It's like, it's really important to feel those feelings, isn't it?
Mm,
And it's kind of weird when I think about it, that I was, and everyone was so concerned, that I was so upset about this. I mean, it was kind of upset to a concerning level. I was really, really obsessed with it. Um, but yeah, I guess it's you have to feel your feelings, don't you? And that
mm,
sensitivity and empathy, when I look at it now, is actually, what I would put a lot of my success in air quotes down to, because I do have, that has really done me well in business. It's not great when you're a kid, is it? When you don't know how to manage these feelings. But when you understand that it's an integral part of you and it's just how your brain works, then you can really embrace it and you can use it for positive. I guess it's when it's untamed and you just don't know why you're feeling like this, and then when a doctor's telling you it's depression and you're a kid, and that all of that stuff's quite scary, isn't it? That's quite a lot to handle. Yeah, I think whenever I do or think about inner child stuff or younger me or something, it does make me really emotional, because I think the things that we go through as kids, and those lonely feelings that we have when we're so confused with the world, and then 40 years later, you find out what it is and why you feel like that, and actually you're not alone. There's so many other people feeling like that. I think that's the sad part, isn't it?
Oh, definitely, yeah. You just, you go back and you always want to shout at yourself, you're not broken, you're just different.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm 35 and I've just been diagnosed. You've been diagnosed, I believe, in 2020.
2020, yeah.
So I suppose, what was it that made you have that penny drop moment and go for an assessment?
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? I really like the Steve Jobs quote about you can only join the dots looking back. And I think when I do look back, I remember so many different things. I remember I was in a NatWest Business Accelerator probably 8 years ago, maybe even 9 years ago, and someone there that I'd met and become good friends with said to me, once we'd known each other a while, said, I've just been down to London to this specialist clinic and I've been diagnosed with ADHD. And I was like, no, you haven't. You're like a, 30-year-old woman. And she said, no, adults can get it, and let's remember, the science only realized that ADHD could exist in adults in 2009. Like, it's so recent, relatively recent, isn't it? And that was my attitude. I was like, no, ADHD is what, naughty little boys have. I didn't even really believe that naughty little boys had it at that point. I just thought they were naughty little boys. I thought it was, something that parents just let them play on their video games too much. And so I just and she said, the reason I'm telling you is because I actually think you're worse than me. I think you've got it. I see so much of it in you. And I just kind of laughed it off. And it was a few years later, probably, I'd say maybe 4 or 5 years ago, that someone in my family started researching it and said that they recognized it in themselves and started kind of sharing these things off social. And I understand why now. And I was like, that's so silly. You haven't got ADHD. And I was like, oh, I recognize that. Oh God, like that sounds like me. And as we've discussed before, then the more you engage with content, the more ADHD stuff you get showed. And I was like, oh my God, this really is me. I don't need a diagnosis. I know there was a really nice period there, actually, where I didn't want a diagnosis because I didn't want medication. And I thought, how brilliant that I recognize these symptoms. And now that there's research and content around it, I can use that for support. I did end up going for a diagnosis in the end, which was really helpful because it's just very validating, isn't it? And I know there's a lot of issues with the diagnosis process, but it was very validating. So yeah, I got my diagnosis in 2020, and I think if I hadn't got the diagnosis, maybe I wouldn't have acted upon it. Maybe I would have just carried on in the business situation I was in, and that wouldn't have been right. So I think getting the diagnosis was really instrumental in me taking it seriously for myself, I think.
That's fascinating. One of the main questions I get asked is, should I go for a diagnosis? Did it change anything? And I've spoken about my experience with that before. Did it change anything with you? How did you feel after the diagnosis?
I've spoken about this with quite a lot of people recently. I think we've touched on it before, where it's so weird to think that I was only diagnosed 3 years ago because it feels like such a different landscape. And, it took me a year to talk about it publicly. I took a long, long time to process it. I was very fortunate in a weird way that me and two other family members were diagnosed at the same time. So we had a really tight support network. We were the three of us were constantly talking about it very openly. And I know at the time there was people I was speaking to or saw content from where people didn't believe them, which just broke my heart because I think, God, what a thing to go through if people aren't believing you. So I was really lucky. It took me, a year to talk about it publicly because I feel like it's a big thing. I know now it's so much more common, and people are kind of getting the diagnosis and then talking about it straight away. But back then, which was only 3 years ago, it sounds so silly. It was much rarer. Like the cases have gone up so significantly in the last few years. It just took me a long time to process it. I think I remember the clinic that I went to get diagnosed, when I told her about the business and I told her about how I manage my life, she said, I can never remember the exact words, but she said something like, you're the worst case of it, the most successful worst case of ADHD I've ever seen, because you've learned to create these systems around you that work for you. So I was able to operate quite a complex business as you were because I've built these systems, built teams, processes, whatever around me. And the competitive part of ADHD, when she said that, I was like, yes, I'm like the worst case she's seen, there was a real celebration there. So yeah, I took it really seriously afterwards. It took me a long time to process, but I took it really seriously, and it, ultimately changed my whole business trajectory.
You should put that quote on your website as the worst, most successful case of ADHD.
I know, I can't quite remember what it was, that the sentiment was that, but every time I say it, it doesn't quite make sense. So I need to like remember exactly what she said. Yeah.
I mean, and you're right, you have had huge success. I mean, I think you've started and sold 4 businesses, which is so impressive. And I think there will be a lot of people listening who might be really keen to know, and I appreciate that what works for some people doesn't work for others, and everyone's different. And you mentioned systems you put in place. Can you share some systems perhaps that you have put in place in the past that have helped you lean into the strengths of what ADHD might bring?
I think it's really funny to think. I started my first business in 2007, and it's funny to think about how I ran businesses before my diagnosis and afterwards. So before, my drive for success was very shame led, I would say, very like, I'll prove them wrong. I've got to do this. You're an idiot. Why can't you do this? Everyone else can do this. Why can't you do this? And I had some really, really bad experiences in my first business and ended up bankrupt from it. So, I think it's really important to say that I've started multiple businesses, way more than 4, but I have, sold 4 of them, but none of them were like multi-million-pound exits. And this is the conversations I have with clients, is like, you can sell a business. Like, there's bits to sell in a business. It could be to your neighbor or to someone down the road or to your competitor on Instagram. It doesn't have to be this big buyout with like due diligence and all, handing over all your records and stuff. I would say the 2 main businesses out of the 4 I sold, I left it way too late. And I knew it, particularly in the last one in my agency. I knew for about a year, at least the 6 months before I sold, I knew I had to get out, and I didn't for various reasons. But I've left it way too late, which has impacted, the financial, like the value of it, and me just needing to go because it's just extreme burnout. So you could say that the systems didn't work. The systems I thought were working were, I thought I was being planned, and I thought that the processes that I was using, or the business was using, were really efficient and effective. But if it results in you burning yourself out completely, are they? Are they the right systems? I think, I don't know about you, Alex, but I'm like, oh my God, this app is going to save my life. This notepad, the way this notepad's set out, this remarkable. I've got like I'm a marketer's dream. I've got literally everything, remarkable pad that I spent 600 quid on because I thought, well, if I stop buying notebooks, that's only a couple of years. I've never used it. The best systems are the ones you use, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. It's so true. And you said something a moment ago about the four businesses that you have had success in weren't your only businesses. You've started quite a few other ones, which for whatever reason haven't been a success or just haven't carried through. And that really hit home because actually I think you've summarized the ADHD qualities there. So relatable, like Uni Lad Bible, all the other Facebook communities. That's probably 5% of the ones I've started. The rest have failed.
Yes.
I tried to start a podcast a year ago, burnt out, failed. And this one now it's traction. So I can 100% relate to that. And I think the qualities that we have is actually the resilience and the attitude of, okay, that failed. I'm not going to dwell on it, or I can't dwell on it because my mind's racing on to the next exciting thing.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas so many people would be like, well, that failed. Either people looking in like, well, what happened to that business? That failed. Or people who aren't neurodivergent who gave it a go. I remember after my first business, which was, ended in bankruptcy, it was, by the end, it was just pure chaos. The wheels had fallen off. It was just awful. Like if I knew then what I knew now, I would have found an exit a long time before. And I remember my dad saying to me, are you going to get a job now? Are you going to go and get a proper job? And, I don't know if I'm sure you can relate to this. For a long time, I just thought I was completely unemployable. The jobs I'd had were just like, I just made my own rules, I couldn't work to a company's rules. So the idea of getting a job was just absolutely crazy. I was like, no, I already know what I'm going to go and do. And I was, it did take me a while, that one really, really knocked my kind of mental and physical health. But it took me a while, but I was on to the next thing.
I suppose this is quite a big question, but how do you think your ADHD, I suppose, shows up in your approach to business?
I think that one of the key things for me, so I got diagnosed during the lifespan of my last business, which was a digital marketing agency that I had for just over 5 years. And getting that diagnosis and realizing that the aspects of myself that I'd found so hard in business and so challenging and had always led to burnout weren't just like failings of mine. It wasn't something that I had to learn to overcome, or I just hadn't found the system that worked, or I just had to work a bit harder or get some more sleep, be a bit more resilient, be a bit more alert. It was fundamentally how my brain worked. So for me now, it's about understanding what those things are. I know that I can't, at the point of diagnosis, I had around a team of like 40. We'd grown through lockdown from a team of 5 to a team of 40. So when we went back to the office, there was pretty much 40 of us, 38, 40. And I had this diagnosis, and through that kind of year of processing that and understanding more and researching it, I was just like looking around me thinking, I've built a prison. I haven't built a business. I've built a prison where I'm in the worst possible environment I can be, which is a team of people, a room of people every day with like sensory overload, energy overload, people needing things from me, like people, it felt like I was just having my energy stolen every day, like meetings dumped in my calendar. And, it was just that sense of, it's that sense of building something or using your energy to build something that's growing, to pay people's wages and pay the overheads. And yeah, pay yourself and all of that. But, when you zoom out and look at it and think, what's the point? What am I doing here? Like, I'm just using my energy, exhausting myself, burning myself out to keep this machine going that's actually not making me happy anymore. And that's one of my core kind of values going forward, is just making sure that I work by myself. If I work with people, I bring, contractors, experts, like people that I can really bounce off and work well with. And creating, I always talk about, like, people used to scoff at lifestyle businesses, didn't they? They'd be like, oh, Dragon's Den, oh, it's a lifestyle business, it's just for you. I want that lifestyle business. Like, I want that business where I can get up, I dictate my calendar, I go for a walk in the mornings, I can, if it's sunny, I spend the day doing what I want, catch up on a bit of work in the evening. Like, I want that lifestyle business. And I don't think you have to jeopardize the financial successes for that. I think, if you're running a business that suits you and suits your brain, everything else follows, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And what you just said sounds like my worst nightmare, being in an office with so many people. That sounds like you're so vulnerable to criticism or rejection, which could really throw you off course on a day, and you just don't know which angle it might come from. That would throw me off. Is that something that you had on your conscious?
Yeah, definitely. Once I understood more about it, I was like, oh, I'm not just, a snowflake, or I'm not just like, I don't know. I think I internalized. It to mean that I was, a bad person or a nasty person or something. That I just couldn't handle this. When you think of a marketing agency, so you've got generally a high churn of staff. We went through the Great Resignation, or whatever they were calling it, after the pandemic, where people were leaving and coming. It was very unstable. We went through iOS, and our main service was Facebook ads. So iOS 14, where, a lot of our services had to really change. And a lot of the clients that we were servicing were quite small businesses, and it really affected them. And, so there was a lot of clients coming and going, a lot of team coming and going. And I feel like, it was almost like this vortex where I was just in the middle, like spinning. And it was not fun at all. It wasn't fun. And, ultimately I kept the business going for the wrong reasons. I kept it going for the team, ultimately, and the clients, and when I did look for a sale, I actually took a much, much lower value, because I wanted to make sure that the team was retained and the clients were looked after, and it was as seamless as possible. And this is what I mean about leaving it too late, because I feel like with both of those two, the first and the two businesses I sold, the two in the middle were kind of much smaller, just e-com brands that I'd started. But the two main businesses that I sold, I just left it far, far too late. And my level of burnout, my level of, once you've lost interest, like having to force yourself to keep that interest, to keep the wheels turning, is burnout inducing, if nothing else. So there's so much, isn't there? And it's, it is hard for other people to understand. It's unfortunate that what feels one way to you can look another way to someone else, can't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Having to carry on at something after you've lost interest in it with an ADHD brain is torture. And I mean, but even the process of selling a company, even if it's, I mean, it sounds like yours, you did have to go through the due diligence and the more bureaucratic stages of selling a company. Because that process in itself was new, did that kind of make it exciting at the end, or were you pulling yourself through the sale process?
Yeah, I was pulling myself through because I think that when you need something, so because of the type of business it was, so if it was a business where there was no team and no clients involved, then I mean, I guess there's always customers involved, but if it was, say, like an e-com brand where it's not, you haven't got anyone really to keep happy, like it could take a break for a while and then someone could pick it back up. An agency, you don't have that luxury, so there's always this kind of fear or threat that it's not going to happen, so you're kind of living on, while all of that's going on and numbers are being reviewed and people are talking to people, and everyone's kind of coming back in to decide on next steps. It's a really anxious time, isn't it? Where, I mean, you've gone through this to a much, much bigger degree than me. Mine's tiny compared to your process, but even so, when there's people that, I had an obligation to the team to keep that going. I had an obligation to the clients to keep that service going. And I knew that me stepping back in just could not possibly be an option. So yeah, it's a really stressful time. And no, it didn't create any novelty or excitement. It was horrible. Luckily, it was very quick.
Yeah.
That's what I will say. It was very quick. I ended up actually selling it to a very, very good friend of mine. And we're still very good friends, and I've helped him. We've worked together on kind of building it into what he wants it to be, and which is great. It's a real kind of honor, and I think says a lot about how we did it, that we're still working together, and I've been able to help him shape it and that kind of thing.
So it's got a nice ending, and I mean,
yeah,
well
really
done for
nice
having
ending.
that self-awareness to spot that you were struggling in that situation and to remove yourself, albeit fast, the sale, or done to remove yourself from it, and now you redesigning life to work with your brain, which is I saw on your website, which is a great summary, I think, and it's just a really helpful way to go about living your life, I think, if you can. And now you help founders grow businesses and start businesses, ADHD founders, which is so interesting to me. I wish I had you by my side 10 years ago. It would have been so helpful.
Yeah.
What's the most common question you get from founders who come to you looking for help?
I think the most common thing, that it might not necessarily their question, but it's this sense of like how we should do business, I honestly think, I've posted this a couple of times recently on various platforms, but I really think that neurodivergent founders, like this wave of awareness and diagnosis we have now, will change the face of business, because there's so many people who are newly diagnosed or recognized traits who are still in this mindset of, business should look this way. Business should look this like neurotypical model. I should be forecasting. I should be business planning. Obviously, there's an element of having to do all of that stuff depending on the size of your business. But by building these like brain first lifestyle businesses, that is what works for our brain. Someone said on my Instagram this morning, she's building a life of, I can't remember the term she used, but basically her early retirement life, like a semi-retirement kind of business where she can where her lifestyle comes first. And, almost everyone I speak to, I think the common misconception, and I see it with clients that come to me, is that to build a brain first business means like revenue last or goals last. But if we think about it very quickly, not even deeply, if we don't put our brains first, we know what happens. We end up in burnout or exhaustion, or fall out of love with our businesses, and then you're never going to hit your goals. So it's almost like a silly thing to say we have to build brain first businesses. Everyone should be building brain first businesses, but particularly neurodivergent people, where our brains aren't built in the same way as the neurotypical world around us. And the more we understand about that, the more we owe it to ourselves and everyone around us, by the way, because my home life wasn't great when I, had this business that was zapping all my energy, and I was miserable when I came home, and I was crying, and I was burnt out, and I was confused and frustrated. Now it's almost like a full, I was going to say 360, it's a 180, isn't it? That's the saying. So yeah, I just think it's really, really imperative that we build these brain first businesses. And I think that that's the main concern that people have by building a business around them, because the way we've internalized and been conditioned to think, they think that that means they won't be able to hit revenue goals, or they'll have to leave this kind of idea of success, whatever their ego's telling them. But that's just not true.
I'm just thinking about some of the work habits of the neurodivergent founders I know, and they're very much not 9 to 5 orientated. They're very they work at unsociable hours. They work when they want to. They can't stop themselves from acting on an idea. They want to work now. Yeah. They don't fit within a traditional structure of working hours, I suppose. However, that is great, but it can also, if you don't have that self-awareness, I suppose it can lead to burnout. You can suddenly be still awake at 4 a.m. in the morning, and that's fine occasionally, but if you're doing that, 7 days a week, then it can be unhealthy. Is there any tips you could give for founders who might be starting out, who have ADHD and can recognize that kind of behavior in themselves, how they might A, spot early signs of burnout, and B, tools they could implement to avoid it?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because when like hyper focus comes along, you really want to give into it. And I call it like, I always talk about, I have, how many businesses do I have at the moment? Probably 4, I think. And I talk about how I just raw dog all of them. I don't have any great plan. It's very like, whatever's the loudest, like whatever needs doing is what I'll go to first. So I follow that. I kind of follow my interest, competition, novelty, anything that sparks my brain. I guess that when we look at like younger founders, it's really easy to fall into those habits, isn't it, of really following your hyper focus, staying up, pulling all nighters, whatever you used to doing at uni and that kind of thing. I think once you get a bit older, you're knackered for a start, so you can't do an all-nighter. People have family and commitments and all of that kind of thing. So I do think that kind of tames down. I also really have learned that the times when I'm in absolute hyper focus, I would say it's 50-50, a good and a bad thing. And there's so many times, I'm sure you'll recognize this, where I've had an idea, I've bought the domain name, I've found the Instagram, I've designed, the logo, I've probably set the website up. And then I think about the next stage and I think, oh God, I haven't got time to do this. Like what? And I've just wasted a day. Or I've done it with, building out a course or a program or whatever it might be. And then I'm just cross with myself because I've actually just wasted a load of time and money buying all this stuff. So I really try and I think this only comes with age, because I guess there's some of those things that have gone on to work, but I really try and sit back now and think, just like sit with it a while and think, so I guess if it's something new, I try and sit with it and really think it through. Think about, once I've done this exciting bit, the bit that I really want to do and I want to do it now. I want to get it done. I can't wait to do this. Do I actually want to do the next bit? What's the bit after that? Do I want to do it, or do I want to hire someone to do it? Do I really want that again? Or, so I try and think about that. Whereas if it's something that I need to do, something that's on my list, and I hyper focus on it, brilliant, like go for it, get it done, do what you need to do to get that done.
It's similar to what I was told before. I think firstly, what you said about not having control over taking action when you're in that hyper-focus stage is easier, or for me, easier said than done. It's when you're to pull yourself out of that and to say, hang on, no, don't buy that domain. This, just shelf that idea. I mean, I guess the traditional advice would be to put the idea on the shelf. If it's still nagging you in a week or 2 weeks' time, if you're still looking over your shoulder and saying, oh, I'm still interested in that, then okay, then maybe buy the domain. But for me and for you, I think, and for others, it's when you're in that moment of craziness and you're just, I want to do it I want to do it now, then it's very hard to pull yourself out of that.
I think that is the key. I think thinking about, this is the fun bit that I really want to do now, but what's it's like, which I know is hard because of executive function, but it's really sitting down and thinking through the process of, once I've done this fun bit, do I actually want to do the next bit? Because I think that's what trips people up. That's where, and this is just one specific example, isn't it? If we're thinking of a new business idea or a new brand idea or something. But I think it is definitely easier said than done, isn't it? It's power. Hyperfocus is powerful. That's why we get so much done.
I've never been able to fight it. And I mean, my girlfriend will tell you, when that happens, then she knows, and she I just zone out, and I'm dead to the world apart from what I'm doing on my computer. I think it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because if I've never fought it, and if I did fight it, I think I probably, I wouldn't have had so many failures, but I also wouldn't have had some of the successes, because they've all been born out of that moment of just leaning into it and going, go now. So it's an interesting one. I mean, it makes sense to say try and control it and try and not go a million miles an hour and just take it in steps to avoid burnout. And I'm still trying to do that, but I've never been successful at it quite yet.
No, it's hard. It's hard because then also if we're saying, if we look at the bigger picture, so times when I've felt like that, and then I have thought, is this really what I want to do? Do I want to do the next bit? Do I want to grow this? Is this something that could actually make money, fit into my life, whatever? If the answer is no, then you're sort of almost your demand avoidance kicks in, doesn't it? But I want to do it. I really want to do this thing now. So it's not a stress. And this is why it's so hard for neurotypical people to understand what's going on, isn't it? Because explaining this to them is, well, just like, don't do it, And then you say, oh, but then demand avoidance. Oh, what's demand avoidance? Yeah, no one likes being told what to do or told what not to do. And these are the areas where it becomes really difficult for people to understand, and very easy for people who purposely don't want to understand to say, you're just lazy or pig-headed or, flaky or whatever it might be.
You said something a minute ago, which was actually, I sort of didn't pick up on at first, but just thinking about it then, I think it's really good advice, is to, when you're in that moment, and I think this is what you meant, just kind of think ahead and be aware of the tasks that you've got to do, which aren't the fun ones.
Exactly.
That might create some balance.
Yeah, so it's not about, for me, it's not about don't do it, don't follow your hyper-focus. It's almost just, and I think this maybe only really comes because I've wasted so much time following it, and, I'm older now. So just kind of stopping and thinking, that moment where you're like, oh my God, this would be brilliant. The domain name's available. If I've had this idea, someone else will have had it. If I don't get the domain name, someone else. So what I do in that moment is put it in my basket, step away. I've got the domain name. I'm all right. I'm good. I've checked Instagram. I can get something like, what I want. No, you can never get the exact phrase, can you? The exact name. and then I'll think it through. I'll just spend, and that's like, I'm talking like 5 or 10 minutes, not a week. I'm talking like, right, what would this look like? Is it actually going to make money, or is this just another like domain name to add to my? I'm not even going to tell you how many. And yeah, it's just that kind of taking a breath and taking a step back and doing what you need to do to satisfy, like finding the domain name and doing all that stuff is often the dopamine hit that you need, isn't it? And then you think, oh, that's a stupid idea. I don't want to do that. I'd have to build a team, or I'd have to invest loads in the beginning, and I don't want to do that, or it would take a ton of time that I don't have or something. And, often you can kind of talk yourself back down that way, I think.
With the entrepreneurs that come to you seeking help, do some of them end up hiring teams and growing, or do you find that most of them generally stick as a sort of a one-man band?
I think, yeah, a lot of them do stick as smaller businesses, or with the kind of, this, I don't know, gig economy, whatever we want to call it, like the rising freelancers, the rising solopreneurs. I don't think it's going to be long until we're just finding these, groups of people that come together for a project and then move on, and almost like film crews. We're going to have this model where that's far more acceptable and common. So a lot of people that I work with are turning to that model now, but it does take some doing. And the biggest barrier for people is like, if they've got a team now, but they're feeling trapped, or they're not happy, or they've realized, there's just more to life. They're missing their kids growing up, or whatever it might be, or it's not fit, because not everyone I work with does have ADHD. The vast majority do. The difficulty then is having those difficult conversations, or, it's so much easier not to have them, isn't it? Not to have the conversations with your team, not to upset them, just to keep things going, to internalize it. But we all know where that ends up. That never ends up in a good place. So yeah, it's about understanding what life needs to look like, understanding what the current business is, understanding what your goals are, and understanding what life currently looks like and the changes that we need to make. And that's often the hardest bit. It's really easy, isn't it, to paint the picture and work out the model and all of that kind of things. But if there are changes to make, that's often the obstacle for people. So that's, what we spend quite a lot of time working through. But I had a call with a client the other day, and this is where my brain is I know this is a controversial thing to say, but is my absolute superpower, because this woman came to me, she recognized ADHD traits, homeschools her child at the moment, and something's happening in her life where she needs to start earning money again. So her question was, I need to find a job, but I also desperately want to stay homeschooling my child. So we built a business in the time we had 90 minutes together, built a business in the time she had available, worked out, like forecasted all the finances for her, built a marketing strategy, social media strategy, like outreach plans, so that she didn't really want to be on social. We built like an outreach plan so she didn't need to be posting online. And to her, that's, we answered her question of, you don't have to go back to work. Like, this isn't you can earn the money you would have earned at work in those 3 hours you have available each day. So being able to do things like that for people is just I'm so grateful to my brain to be able to think that quickly and give them the courage that I have, or like give them just enough bravery to actually make it happen.
Wow. Well, thanks for being so honest. And I don't think that was controversial, the superpower comment, because
some people don't like it, do they? Some people think it's, don't like the term. So
no, you're right. They don't. But I think I think it's okay to describe your own, something that it works really well for you as a good thing.
Yeah.
I agree. I think it's just going off topic slightly. It's when you describe ADHD as a superpower in a more
For
broad term. For
everyone.
exactly,
Yeah.
yeah. So no, I
Yeah.
don't think there's anything.
Yeah.
But no, it's amazing. It genuinely is. Have you noticed if you the clients that come to you, if you noticed a type of business or an industry or a theme in the companies that crop up over and over again?
I mean, it's so weird you asked this because this morning I was looking at my application to work with me form. I have like a form that goes through to a Google Sheet, and the last 10 people on there are all American real estate agents. So I don't know what's happened. I worked with one American real estate agent, and I think he's kind of shared it with his network or something, but I mean, I'm guessing that's what happened. So that's a real outlier. That's very odd. Generally, it is very successful founders who have been diagnosed and are now like, what the fuck do I do now? Like, how do I make my business work with my brain? Basically, people who are in my situation, I think there's so many people in that situation that just need a lot of the work I do is just these like 90-minute strategy calls, and it's often all they need. It's just a bit of redirection. It's not burning the whole thing to the ground and rebuilding. It's redirection, and also I think we're really bad at putting ourselves first. So it's kind of repositioning them as the founder rather than as the punch bag for everyone, or people who will just fall into hyper focus, just working all the time, and their own life or needs or self-care or whatever just always goes to the bottom of the list, doesn't it? So yeah, I would say that's the commonality. I think that even within ADHD, you'll see this. There's so many different kinds of people. There's people who really harness the superpowers. There's people who really fall into the kind of negativity and the victim mentality of it. There's this like Gen Z kind of group of people who are like loud and proud and dopamine dressing and really, really unmasking. And then I feel like there's my kind of group of people who are, 40 plus women who have masked their whole life, don't even really know what it would look like to not mask. It's not really part of our like objective for kind of learning how to work with our ADHD. It's just more about understanding it about ourselves, feeling really liberated by taking off the weight of like shame and I should be able to do this, why can't I do this? And it's much more about like moving forward rather than these amazing Gen Z who are all in their pink hair and dungarees and all that kind of thing that are just really kind of celebrating themselves. I feel like we're in a very different place, and that's a lot of the founders I work with that are in this place of, I've got a family and kids, and I've got all these commitments in my life, and I've had this diagnosis, so I feel like everything's changed in me, but nothing's really changed around me. And that's one of the very common things that I work with them on is how do we make the outside reflect the inside?
Masking's super interesting. I'd love to talk about that in a second.
Yeah.
Just last question on your work. What's the most common problem, and I think it would be interesting for people listening, that founders bring up in your calls?
I guess the most common thing is it's just this sense of heaviness, I've had calls before where we've both been in tears because they're just talking about how just heavy everything feels, this shame and guilt and never feeling good enough, the things that we've internalized from such a young age. I feel like the male and female experience is so different in that respect. The way that women internalize our hyperactivity into, anxiety or perfectionism or being a good girl, being top of the class, whereas boys' hyperactivity often makes that, the opposite, unfortunately. You look at what's the stats for undiagnosed ADHD in male prisons, 75% of prisoners is just horrific. Like, they're naughty boys that just continue to be naughty boys because it's never harnessed or supported or nurtured in them. Whereas girls, it's very, very different. It's, everything I said. So yeah, working with these women can often be a real process of, and it's not just women I work with, but predominantly can be a real process of just letting go of some of that. And I'm not a life coach, I'm not a therapist, that's not really, but so much of it is tied up in their business. And I recognize that from me so much. In my first business, I worked with someone who just made me feel so stupid and useless. And because I couldn't work in the way that, or I didn't work in the way they worked. I didn't want to sit for 2 hours looking at a spreadsheet and trawling through numbers, and I'd get distracted and I'd, lose focus. And I didn't know why. I was completely lost at the time. I was so disoriented. I kept saying, I feel like everyone else has got this rule book, but no one else will let me see it. Everyone else knows what they're doing, and I'm just like trying to keep up, like desperately running to keep up, and it's exhausting. And I see that reflected in so many people that I work with. It's really sad.
Is masking a topic that your clients come to you and speak to you about?
Yeah, I think, as you said, masking's such a funny one, isn't it? Because I think even when I see some of these, TikToks or Instagram or whatever pop up talking about unmasking, it still surprises me. And I think, oh yeah, I suppose that is masking, isn't it? I just don't know. I talk about this a lot with friends, ADHD friends or autistic friends. And I think because we're friends, we're all of a similar age and we're all of a similar life stage, I guess. And so the thought of unmasking is almost impossible. Where do you start? Like, where do you start? And also, I mean, this is quite a vulnerable thing to say, but who am I? I don't know. I've masked for 45 years. I don't know who. I feel like when I'm with my husband, I'm completely unmasked, but I don't know that that's the best version of me to be around. I'm completely myself, but that doesn't mean I'm necessarily like fun. And I mean, we have fun. Obviously, we have a great. But if I'm just sat there on the sofa watching telly, if he, talks to me, I could snap at him, or I could, I hate like being interrupted and all that ADHD stuff. So for me, it's like, where does the line come in of being a sort of good citizen and a good member of society, and someone who is I'm trying to avoid the word nice, but like a good person in the world, and unmasking? Because if I just went out there and everyone that spoke to me, I was like, don't talk to me, I'm focusing, or that's where it comes in for me. And often when I do see people talking about unmasking, that is my question, like, how far do you go? Because we can't go from 0 to 100, can we? And a lot of people, when they talk about unmasking, they're expecting everyone else around them to understand what that means and why they're doing it and why they've masked and what it means to unmask now. And we're expecting this level of understanding that we're expecting everyone else to have that. So I've seen people talking about how, they've turned down an event because let's say it was too noisy, or, it wasn't neurodivergent friendly. That is like more power to you. That is brilliant. But we're still at zero, aren't we? Like a lot of these events don't understand that that would be an issue for a
Mm.
neurodivergent person. That's just one example, you know. There's so many examples, but I think if we are going to truly unmask, then there's just an element of education that needs to be done, not necessarily by us, but by society for everyone to understand what's going on. Do you agree with that? Do you think that there's do you how do you feel about masking? I think it's a really interesting topic.
I find it really interesting, and I've had everything you said makes sense. I've had quite some different opinions on masking on the
Yeah.
podcast. From it's so nuanced. I mean, I personally don't relate 100% to it because to me, the idea of what I've seen on social media is the idea of masking is that you're consciously altering yourself in order to fit in to a situation.
Yes.
And I don't relate to that at all. I mean, I suppose an example might be, and I've thought about this myself, you know, how I act now around my girlfriend in the flat is very different to how I acted around her on our first date when I first met her.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So I was very different then but I'm more comfortable around her now. But was I consciously like trying to not come across as goofy or silly on our first date? Maybe, but if I went on, you know, and she'll listen to this, but if God forbid, if I went on another first date, would I still act the way I did? You know, of course I would, but that's learned behavior in a way.
Yeah.
I'm
That's
not like,
conditioning, isn't it?
yeah, because you want to put your best self forward, and okay, maybe my best self is, you know, me rolling around on the floor and being silly and what I do in the flat, but you wouldn't do that. I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that in a restaurant. You kind of want to.
No.
Sure, there's an expectation of a man to appear confident and to be assertive and to, you know, stand up with a good posture when you meet someone for the first time. But I enjoy
Yeah.
that. It's not like
Yeah.
a forced effort. Like that Alex me on the first date and Alex me now in the flat when I'm rolling around playing with my dog, you know, none of those were an effort to I'm not faking anything in both of those situations.
No.
So for me, it's incredibly complicated and something I'm still trying to understand.
It
But
is, it really is nuanced, isn't it? It really is. Like there's times when I think I know when I'm masking when I get home and I'm like, oh, and but then is it just exhausting being around people? Am I just exhausted by being around people? And the person I present when I'm in a group of people is, you know, because of my ADHD, I am like, I hear what everyone says and I want to be in the conversation. I'm smiling a lot, you know, whereas I guess my natural face is just quite a bit like resting bitch face, you know, it does takes a lot of energy to like look engaged and is that I mean, I'm not being fake. I do want to be there with people. I do want to, I could do without like tuning into every single conversation and trying very hard to focus on one. That's exhausting in itself, isn't it? But yeah, I do just wonder where the line is between. I shared a post on Instagram a while ago that said about one of my best tricks in business and one of the things I talk to clients about all the time is like finding your Sasha Fierce. So finding your alter ego. If there's a job you don't want to do, or if there's, you know, if you have to do a presentation or something, if you just have to trick yourself for a while. And a lot of people came at me saying, this is really unhealthy. It's just basically masking in another, using different words for masking. And I was like, okay, then I really don't get it because this what like this alter ego kind of psychology works for so many people. It's talked about. It's a real
mm,
thing. It's why Beyonce does it. So yeah, it's such a huge topic, isn't it? And it's very nuanced. I personally I feel like as long as I am comfortable with who I'm being at that time, I think that's all right for me now,
mm,
you know? And if I can control the environment around me in terms of how I work, where I work, who I work with, if I can control those elements that I know are a trigger for me or are exhausting. Like when I think about working in the office, working in an office all the time, surrounded by people, that there's definitely an element of masking there that is exhausting. So if I can control those things around me, so the times when perhaps I am masking are less, then I think that's a good place to start, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And it's super interesting, the whole topic.
Yeah, it is.
Such a you could probably have a whole probably speak for 2-3 hours just on this topic. I mean,
Yeah,
I said in the first episode a while ago that there are many versions of me, and there's probably many versions of you. Do you think?
yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. Many versions. And there has been over the years. Definitely, I often think about this. If someone had met me 10 years ago, they wouldn't recognise me now. Even 5 years ago, and every 5 and 10 years before that, yeah, there's definitely been so many versions of me, and I think that's normal, isn't it? To an extent, I think it's normal that we grow up and we go through phases. I guess as ADHDers, we're like very reflective about that stuff, aren't we? And because of masking and our drive for authenticity and stuff, we're always kind of questioning that stuff. And I guess actually that's where, when I look back and I think about masking, that makes more sense to me. Before I knew, and I think, oh, I was trying to be that person, or I think of different groups of friends that I used to have and how I try and fit into each one. And yeah, that makes a bit more sense actually. Looking back, makes a bit more sense of masking. And maybe that's where the different versions of us comes in.
There's definitely so many versions of me. Throughout my life, I can be in a business meeting, or I can be on the witness box in a courtroom, which I have been, or I can be playing with my dog on the sofa. They're all me.
Yeah.
They're all very different,
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
different. One is like they're all very different situations, and I respond to all those situations differently.
Yeah.
But I never faked any of my traits or character or personality in any of those situations. I don't think. I don't think.
It reminds me of there's do you know the theory of like context collapse? I don't know who came up with it, I can't remember, but it's this theory of, people talk about it a lot online. So imagine you're at a wedding and you've got your family there and old school friends and your uni friends and your partner's family and someone from the church and grandparents. Like trying to have one conversation with all of those people is almost impossible, isn't it? If you're one person speaking to all those people, how do you choose the topic and the tone, the tone you speak in and whether you swear or not and all that kind of stuff. So people talk about that a lot relating to online, where you're speaking to your audience, but anyone can actually come and consume your content and interpret it in a completely different way. And I guess it relates in a way to that, doesn't it? You're different. If you take all those groups of people at the wedding, you're going to be a slightly different version of yourself with each of them to be appropriate for them, aren't you? You're not going to speak to your grandparents the same way you speak to your mates from uni or your in-laws or whatever. So I think it just comes down, I don't know, where does social conditioning stop and masking start? I don't know. I mean, I guess that's a huge topic, isn't it?
An interesting example I've just thought of while you were speaking is stand-up comedy, something I've done a little bit in the past. You wouldn't know.
Have you? I'd love to see that.
Years ago. And if you go into the green room at a comedy gig, you see 4 or 5 men and women waiting to go on stage. Generally, I find stand-up comedians off stage very quiet, very anxious, very shy, very quiet people. They go on stage, it's the polar opposite. They turn into Robin Williams, and they are hilarious. They're charismatic, and that's to me, just thinking about it, is the most glaring example of how someone can be so different. But when I was on stage, and the comics I know, it's never fake. They love being that person.
It's an act, isn't it? It's an act. That's an act, the same as an actor taking on a character for a role, isn't it?
Mm,
So yeah, I don't know. I don't. This is why I think that. I mean, it's very obvious to say it, isn't it? But within the ADHD community, there are so many different groups of people within that, and I think that I speak very much to the ADHD founders who are not necessarily the kind of freelancers, because a lot of that like Gen Z neurodivergent, dopamine dressing um, gang who are incredible and are paving the way for so many people have are freelancers because they've realized that the corporate world or 9 to 5 world just isn't for them. That's very different to the audience that I work with who or speak to who are that bit further on and have a very different set of problems, definitely not easier or harder, but just a very different set of problems where it's about managing your business alongside your family, or they've found a level of success and realize that it doesn't make them happy. So now what? It's a very different kind of set of
mm.
problems.
Let's talk about social media, and
Yeah,
because that's where we met. You have
yeah,
a very successful Instagram page, which I think I liked. We met on Instagram. I think you DM'd me or I
yeah.
DM'd you, and that's how we
Yeah.
got to know
I
each other.
think I shared your amazing episode with Barbara, didn't I? I loved it. I
Yes,
loved, yeah,
yeah, for sure.
Barbara Grogoski.
Yeah, that's right, Barbara Rogoski. Yeah,
That's
yeah,
right.
yeah. No, amazing
Yeah, I
episode.
loved it. Yeah, it was brilliant.
We spoke briefly about this before. All of the ADHD content on social media, TikTok,
Yeah.
Instagram, all of them. Some good, some not so good. What's your opinion on the influx of ADHD content? I mean, obviously it's great, but I think it has some drawbacks. What do you think?
Yeah, I think, and again, another huge subject, isn't it? I think one of the things I think, in terms of my personal experience, is that since I have started consuming ADHD content on TikTok, I don't enjoy going on TikTok anymore because it's literally all I get. And and that's a interesting thing for me, because whereas I always used to think, my God, that TikTok algorithm is like amazing. It is amazing, but at night time, which is when I would generally have a look on TikTok, I don't want to hear it. I've heard about it, I've talked about it, I've been thinking about it, doing it all day. I don't want to hear that at night when I'm trying to relax. And I also think that which is brilliant actually. Thank you, TikTok, because it's really cut my scroll time down. Thank you very much for that. I think that there's an intentionality behind it as well, which is that I started sharing ADHD content like middle of February, and at that point, I was on just over 18,000. And this weekend, I hit like 50,000, which is what we are, a couple of months. So it's been very, very fast growth. I've intentionally slowed it down recently because it was just too much. It was burning me out. Um, so there is high engagement and high growth to be found by sharing ADHD content. And I think therein lies the problem, where your intention behind sharing it, my intention behind sharing it, actually started off as it was just something I had to talk about. And I actually feel like, even though it was only 3 years ago, I'm at the point now where I've been through a lot of that process. I'm very well researched on it. I read a lot. I think I consume a lot around it. And a lot of the things that were very obvious to me were actually really helping a lot of people, and it really helped me to talk about it. I think what we're seeing now, and this is going to sound really, really hypocritical of me to say, but I think we're seeing a lot of, I mean, you started Lad Bible and Uni Lad, a lot of that engagement baiting kind of content that people know will do really well. I put a post out a month or so ago now that's on like I've never spent a penny on any of this content. So completely organic. It's on over 1 million reach. It's got like 60,000 likes, comment saves, whatever, 60,000 likes. And people keep reporting these. It's been translated into like 3 other languages or something. People keep reporting them to me. So I think there is, as we know on social media, people know how to look for the viral content, highly engaged content, and so if your intention is to talk about ADHD just to grow an account, then I think perhaps that's where the problem lies. There's also the other side of it, which is the content consumers, because when I first started sharing ADHD content, it was much more broad, and some of the comments I was getting were just like absolutely wild. It was just crazy. It really burnt me out in the beginning. So now I'm really careful just to share ADHD founder content, stuff that's really specific for that cross section. And I think there's a bit of a fear of us doing ourselves a disservice, where it's hard to say, isn't it? Because does everyone see this content, or is it just us because we're in this world? I think it's probably just us because we are in these echo chambers. But I think that we're treading a fine line if we want to educate and make people aware of the lived experience. Just kind of flooding the internet with this kind of very general content could actually do the opposite, I guess. If, I know that people are getting a bit kind of overwhelmed by it already.
Yeah, for sure. There's so much. And a lot of it is good. A lot of it is very reinforcing the stigma. I saw one clip of somebody walking in front of traffic and going, "Oh, my ADHD again," and it got like millions and millions of views and everyone laughing.
God, no.
And that's quite an extreme example, but there was a lot of content that just reinforces the sort of stigma and the stereotype, I think, which annoys me. As a content creator on the subject now myself, I'm very careful to not position myself as an expert. Because it's one kettle of fish being good at creating social media content. I believe if I research something, I could probably build a community on any topic if I spent a couple of months researching it. But just because I know how the algorithms work and I know how to create content, that doesn't make me qualified to position myself as an expert. I get a lot of DMs from people asking me quite medical questions, and I'm very quick to say, I'm not the guy to ask.
Yeah.
No,
I'm exactly the same. I really try and position myself as like opening up the conversation rather than making like suggestions for their business in the sense from an ADHD perspective. I get all, can you diagnose me? What medication should I be taking? And in the beginning, I've talked about this a few times, but in the beginning I was getting some very heavy, people call it trauma dumping, don't they? My DMs, where I just get these very, very long messages. And it's difficult to manage that, because the reason people are messaging me about it is because they can't talk about it openly. So they don't want to leave a comment on like my post or whatever, because they're not kind of out or they're not getting the support they need. And so in the beginning, I was really trying to answer every comment and go back to every DM, because, people, that's like a nice thing to do, isn't it? But you quickly realize you just can't. It's just exhausting, and doesn't serve anyone then, does it? If you then, there was a stage where I thought, do I even want to be posting this? And then, that doesn't help anyone at all, does it?
No, of course not. No. But it's fascinating. And to speak to a fellow content creator in the space is so interesting. Wow. this has been so fun, and we've actually, looking at the time, we've gone way over how long I thought we'd be talking, but I think it's been so worth it, and I'm so happy for the episodes to go on for longer than an hour if the content is valuable, and I think this has been so valuable. The closing question that I've just started doing, and I don't know if I'll keep doing it, but we will see, is this: if you could spend an afternoon with anybody, whether they're alive today or lived at any point in history, who would it be and what would you do with them?
Oh my God, what a question. This is like the dinner party question, isn't it? But even worse, one person. Who would I spend an afternoon with? I mean, it would have to be Beyonce. It would have to be. Like, literally, then I was thinking, come on, you've got to think of someone better than Beyonce. I mean, if I could have two in one, to spend the afternoon with Beyonce and Jay-Z, I mean, just think of all you would learn
My
in
girlfriend,
an afternoon with them.
What would you do with them?
I'd just literally go with a list of questions. I'd want to like hang out for a bit. I'd want to see their house, take me like to your favourite shops and stuff. But I would just have so many questions. I'd also just want to watch how they interact with each other, because I often wonder with those relationships how, I mean, I know we all know the kind of controversy between them two, but how much, it's like the Beckhams, isn't it? How much of a relationship is it? How much of a business brand thing is it? That really fascinates me about them. I'm definitely going to come off this recording and kick myself there. Oh my God, why didn't I say so and so? But yeah, it would have to, imagine if you just got a letter saying, oh, come and we've got a flight, come and spend the afternoon with Beyonce and Jay. You'd just like, I'd just die.
Well, you never know.
You never know. You never know. Stranger things have happened, haven't they? To stranger people. So yeah, it would be them, I think.
Where can people find you if they want to reach out to you?
The best place is probably Instagram at Amanda Perry. I'm on LinkedIn a bit as well. Not as much on Instagram. If you go to Instagram, look at my links or like my website, and everything's there, my email and stuff. That's the best place.
Amazing. Amanda, thank you so much. It's been super insightful. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. It's been really fun. Thanks for having me. And also thanks for having this podcast and, opening up the conversation in the way you do. It's really helpful to a lot of people.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on.
Thank you.